The Michigan Wolverines have passed their toughest test of the season so far, so everything is in the clear, right? Wrong. The Wolverines have 3 more games to go on this journey, but before they can think about Buckeyes and Rose Bowls, they have to focus on the Badgers. Welcome to episode 11 of Road to the Victors, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines. I am your host, Andrew Hammond, assistant sports editor at the Detroit Free Press. On this journey, we are taking you game by game, week by week, to give you the inside look at how the 1997 Michigan Wolverines captured their share of a national title. Before Michigan can even think about what is ahead of them in the season finale, they've got to hit the road one more time to face the Wisconsin Badgers. But it's not just Michigan in the home stretch. From coast to coast, bowl bids are wrapping up and conference titles are being won. 2 games, 8 quarters separate Michigan from a shot at a national title in Pasadena on New Year's Day. They are also the number 1 ranked team in the country following their impressive win over Penn State the previous week. They are also in a 3-team race for the national title, along with Nebraska and Florida State. But first things first, they've got a road trip to Wisconsin at hand. If you want the complete story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines, the Free Press is publishing a commemorative book. Hail Yes, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines can be purchased at um.pictorialbook.com. If Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State are the top brawlers in the Big Ten, the Wisconsin Badgers are the disciplined and scrappy upstart who has a mean left hook and doesn't mind turning games into a rock fight. In fact, they probably embrace it. After being in the wilderness for nearly 30 years, the arrival of head coach Barry Alvarez sparked a run of success for Wisconsin that remains relevant to this day. In 1993, the Wisconsin Badgers won a share of the Big Ten title and clinched a spot in the Rose Bowl for the first time since 1962. Wisconsin was no longer an easy win on the schedule for Big Ten teams needing to reach a bowl game. Seeing the W in Wisconsin turned from win to worry. Now, the 2 programs meet in a cold and snowy Camp Randall Stadium, with Michigan looking to remind the Badgers that the path to a Big Ten title still goes through Michigan and Ohio State. When we come back after the break, former Free Press sports writer Keith Gave joins us to talk about the Badgers and the Wolverines. We are back with Road to the Victors, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines. The Michigan Wolverines faced the Wisconsin Badgers on a cold but perfect Big Ten weather day in Madison, Wisconsin. A man who was there for that game was Keith Gave. Now, Keith, if you could you give us just a little bit of inside baseball? You weren't at the Penn State-Michigan game the week before, but you were covering a fight, I believe?
Yeah, I was covering, I think, I'm not even, I honestly thought it was one of the Holyfield and Tyson fights, but my old boss, Gene Myers of the Free Press, reminded me that I think it was a Michael Moore fight that I was covering out there. I even forgot. I do remember watching the game from one of the hotel, I think it was Little Caesars, the sports betting operation there, on those great big tall floor to ceiling screens, watching the Michigan Penn State game on TV there, and just being almost shocked at how well Michigan played. I mean, how totally they dominated Penn State the game. I wasn't really expecting that. And that's what vaulted them to number 1, of course.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in the 90s and into the 2000s, the Wisconsin program really rose to prominence. For the audience out there, could you just talk about how bad things were for Wisconsin football in the pre-Barry Alvarez days?
That's a great point, Andrew, and I'm glad you're making it. When Michigan was going into Camp Randall Stadium that day, and I got to tell you, I talked to Lloyd Carr before the game and told him I was a little bit excited about going to Camp Randall, because if you're a sports writer or a sports fan, you need to put that on your bucket list. It is, and if a football Saturdays there are an event like no other in Big Ten country. And I remember Lloyd saying, Keith, I'll promise you two things. It's going to be cold and it's going to be loud. And he said, this is a very, very good Wisconsin football team. And it, previous to that, it had been going to Wisconsin was like going to Indiana or Illinois or Northwestern, Purdue, maybe even Michigan State, on those down years. It was one of those easy A's. If you're taking, a college course, you could pretty much depend on a win. But Barry Alvarez was constructing a powerhouse that really it is lasting until today. I mean, he turned that program around. Wisconsin has been a legitimate power in the Big Ten for the most part since those days in the mid to late 90s.
It's kind of crazy. You think about Wisconsin football and you think about just at that point, they aren't even close to the apex. Yes, they reached the Rose Bowl in 1993-94, but at the same time, they're still ascending because they kind of hit the climax around 99, I would say, with Ron Dayne winning the Heisman. So you see that this program is on the come up, and you look at Michigan's journey to get to the Rose Bowl. You beat Michigan State, you beat Penn State, both of those on the road. You have Ohio State next week, but Wisconsin, this feels like the classic, we call it, the trap games, but this feels like one of those where if I'm Lloyd Carr, I am hammering home. You finish every play, you do everything you have to do, because this team is going to be a problem for a while. And they're your problem this week. So it's so fascinating to see how this season unfolds for the Michigan Wolverines. And one of the key plays on Michigan's opening drive is Brian Griese connecting with Charles Woodson, who connects back to Brian Griese for the rare quarterback screen. Here's how it was called by Frank Beckman and Jim Brandstatter of WJR and the Michigan Radio Network.
Now Howard in motion left, no backs. Here's a lateral to Woodson. He's going to throw the old transcontinental to Griese. Right side at the 25, the 20, 15, 10, and he's run out of bounds inside the 5 down at the 1 yard line. Ooh. How do you like that?
And I'll tell you what, Charles Woodson comes into the outside. He just drops back 3 yards, catches a lateral pass from Griese, then throws it back to Griese on the right sideline. When Woodson's got the ball, the entire Wisconsin team ran toward him. Griese was left all alone over there. And how about Woodson? He catches passes, he intercepts passes, and now he throws passes.
That play would lead to a Chris Howard touchdown to give the Michigan Wolverines a 7-0 lead. This was a really old school mixed with some new school football. Michigan is running the ball at a high rate, mixing in some passes, most notably to Charles Woodson. With Michigan looking to get Woodson involved as much as possible, what impressed you about the offensive game plan to include Charles Woodson? It feels like at just the perfect rate, not too much, not too little. It's kind of like, the Goldilocks and the Three Bears theory, not too hot, not too cold. It's just right. It feels like this is what Michigan is doing really for the first time all season long.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Andrew. And Lloyd Carr had a nice touch, I think, with how and when to use Charles Woodson. And that play kind of surprised everybody. First set of downs, right? And I got to tell you, as good as Charles Woodson was, and he was great. I voted for him for the Heisman Trophy, and I was there in New York when he won the darn thing. And he should have been credited with a touchdown on that play. Brian Griese got tackled at the 1. He's a little bit like Tom Brady. I like to see those two guys in a in a race. You most quarterbacks you can time with a stopwatch. Those two guys you need a sundial.
Exactly.
He's any other quarterback in the land. And I'm not knocking Brian Griese because he quarterbacked this team to a national championship, right? And he made some great plays and great runs at key times, but he got caught from behind. That should have been a touchdown pass from Charles Woodson, but a really good, smart play caught a very good Wisconsin team off guard.
And it's funny because you go back and watch that play, and the way it's set up, the convoy is ready to go.
Yeah.
And the big uglies, as Keith Jackson would call them, are moving, moving down the field. And Brian's just like, guys, I'm going as fast as I can over here. But he gets to one, and it feels like that's one of those plays where it just takes all of the energy out of the stadium. And it's so impressive to watch Michigan's play calling in this game because they could have been conservative, but no, they're mixing it up. They're, getting Wisconsin off guard. So I was very impressed by that. And early in the second quarter, Brian Griese would put Wisconsin to bed essentially with a 38-yard pass to Ty Streets to make the score 13-0.
Thomas is the only setback. Fake to him. Griese rolling right to throw. He's got all kinds of room. He's going to go deep for Ty Streets. Open at the goal line. Touchdown, Michigan! Ty Streets makes the grab for the score from 37 yards out, and the Wolverines have a 13-0 lead. He got behind the safety, Bobby Myers, and Griese laid it up there in the breeze perfectly.
And Ty Streets is answering his critics who are on him pretty big the last few weeks when he's dropped some balls. That time he got open, and it was the run action fake to the wide side and a good block coming back by Mark Campbell, who gave Griese all the time in the world to allow Streets, who was split wide to the left, to run all the way to the right sideline and get the touchdown.
A pair of field goals by both teams makes the score 16-3 Michigan at halftime. When we come back from the break, the Wolverines look towards a showdown with Ohio State when Road to the Victors returns after this break. We are back with Road to the Victors, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines. Michigan leads Wisconsin 16-3 at halftime. Wisconsin would strike first, offering a small bit of drama in the second half, scoring a touchdown to make the game 16-10 Michigan. Yet the Wolverines' ability to grind it out made the game kind of boring, basically. In wrestling shows, they have these things that are called cool-offs or let-me-up matches. In some ways, with bigger things down the road, you can't get your audience too high or too low. And this feels like a cool down or a let-me-up match. This feels like the perfect game for Michigan. Take care of business, and all of a sudden, you remain undefeated. Did you get that sense of that's what they were kind of doing, is just not necessarily putting their foot off the pedal, but sticking to what they do best and just kind of shortening the game against Wisconsin?
Yes, I thought it was very workmanlike, very efficient, really on both sides of the ball. Although I remember the defensive players, Glenn Steele, primarily talking about how the defense didn't play a very good game that day. He was not happy with the way his defense played, and he gave all credit to the Michigan offense. But, when it got to 16-10, I never thought that Michigan was in trouble, but I knew enough, basically from listening to Lloyd Carr, talk about how you cannot take this Wisconsin team lightly. And you talk about, the whole trap game mentality. Lloyd Carr had that figured out way ahead of everybody else. He reminded his team, I'm sure every day that week, of the year before when they were 7-1 and they went to Minnesota, and one of those easy A games, they should have won. They lost that game 9-3, and it kind of ruined their whole season. He wanted to make sure that didn't happen to his team again. And like you said, they grinded this one out and grounded a really good Wisconsin team into a defeat.
Yeah, and in the fourth quarter, Michigan would make it 26-10, and Wisconsin scored late to make things respectable, but the final score was 26-16. Michigan picks up the victory. Wisconsin has been pushed aside. Now things can be firmly focused on Michigan wrapping up the regular season against Ohio State. And there's some delicious irony that's involved with the 1997 game between Michigan and Ohio State. For the past few seasons, it had been Michigan who was looking to spoil Ohio State's dream seasons. Now it's Ohio State looking to spoil Michigan's season. Is that something, just the irony of it all, is that something people instantly thought about essentially when the clock ran zero in Wisconsin and everybody's looking around like Michigan could be playing for a shot at the Rose Bowl and a shot at the national championship?
Yeah, I'm not sure that people thought about the whole revenge factor thing. I just don't think that, I know they talk about that, the players talk about it and so on, but a rivalry is rich and as vicious as Michigan, Ohio State doesn't need any more elements, really. I think all you need to say is Michigan, Ohio State. Nothing else matters, really. And I think that's how fans pretty much figured it out. Now, the players themselves, they, especially that Michigan team had a lot of Ohio players on it. That's a big game for those guys all the time. But I'm not sure that whole revenge factor for the fan base registered as much as just, oh boy, here, that the whole business about winning a Big Ten championship, going to the Rose Bowl, and staying alive for a potential national championship, that was on everybody's minds, obviously.
Absolutely. And before we let you go, what are some of the initial impressions that you had about that game taking place in the Big House? It's a Ohio State team that essentially is kind of, it's funny to say now because I feel like Gen Z, when they look at Ohio State back then, a down year for Ohio State, they're still in the Rose Bowl picture. They're ranked 4th in the country when Michigan is hosting them that next week. So it's like in a down year, they're still a contender. But just go over some of your impressions coming into that game between Michigan and Ohio State.
Well, it was a stretch there in those years where Michigan was having a pretty good run, a pretty good streak against Ohio State. You can't ever take that team for granted, even in a down year. Like you said, a down year for Ohio State is being ranked 4th in the land, right? I mean, that hasn't changed since then. The hype, I just remember the hype going into it. Michigan undefeated, number 1, and facing their arch rival. But the biggest factor of them all was that they were playing at the Big House and not at the Horseshoe down in Columbus. So that was really important for that team that year.
Before we wrap up the Wisconsin chapter, but there's something fascinating that we talked about a little bit before we began recording, and I wanted to hear from you, Keith. You were talking about Wisconsin a little bit.
Yeah, we talked about Wisconsin being a trap game, and then followed up by the Michigan-Ohio State game, where there's always sniping going on between the players and not the coaches so much, but the players especially, and the fans obviously. But I remember. I was looking at preparing for this, what we're doing today. I went back and looked at some of my notes, Andrew, and I was really struck by what both coaches, Lloyd Carr and Barry Alvarez, had to say after that game at Wisconsin between two pretty good teams. We got, talking to Lloyd Carr after, he said, "I want to commend Wisconsin. They played a tremendous football game, hard-hitting, physical, very typical of the Big Ten and for us." Lloyd Carr on Wisconsin. Now Barry Alvarez on Michigan. We were defeated by a very good football team, Badgers coach Barry Alvarez said. "I was very impressed with the Michigan ball club. They had a lot of publicity about their great defense, and it lived up to its billing, but I was just as impressed after we played them with their offense." These are two coaches. One of them just got beaten, talking about one another. I was heartened by when I read this about the respect that coaches had for one another way back. It's a new era today. We got coaches. all we hear is sniping back and forth, right? When's the last time we heard this stuff from coaches, after a really competitive football game?
That's so fascinating, Keith, because you look at, ironically enough, the way Michigan and Ohio State coaches are now between Ryan Day and Jim Harbaugh. Clearly, there's kind of a respect level, but at the same time, there really isn't. They'll say that there's a respect level because they'll acknowledge each other's teams are talented and good, but they want to beat each other. Basically, I want it to hurt. I want to beat that guy. I want it to hurt. And so it's so fascinating to see how coaches were back then, because there truly was, it feels like Lloyd Carr knows Wisconsin's going to be something in a year or two.
You can see it coming.
And Barry Alvarez understands, okay, this is kind of a measuring stick for us. Ohio State and Michigan have been the measuring stick in this league for 30, 40 years. Mm-hmm. This is how we measure up. I thought we accounted for ourselves pretty well, but That's a damn good team over there. So, yeah, you're exactly right. It's so refreshing to hear, and you aren't talking about recruiting battles, which I get it's a different game now than it was back then.
Sure.
But it still feels so refreshing, as you said, to see two coaches just give the ultimate respect for each other, and two class gentlemen, we should also say.
It reminded me of what I feel is a better time in college football for sure. And, today you got Harbaugh and Day, Harbaugh and anybody who's coaching on the Michigan sidelines. They say the right things, but it doesn't take much to read between the lines. And that there's a healthy amount of dislike and disrespect, for the other guys. And, maybe that's healthy. It's just very different now. And to me, it detracts a little bit from a bunch of college kids playing a good football game on the field.
While the Michigan Wolverines vanquished Wisconsin, another story was developing on the West Coast. In a game with major Rose Bowl implications, the UCLA Bruins won their 8th straight game of the season, putting up 52 points against the Washington Huskies. Why is this so important? With UCLA's victory, it meant that the following Saturday, the Washington State Cougars would be playing for a spot in the Rose Bowl for the first time in 67 seasons. The Michigan Wolverines would also be playing for a spot in the Rose Bowl against a school that would like nothing more than to play spoiler in the Big House. Before we go, our guest has been Keith Gave. Game audio has been provided by WJR and the Michigan Radio Network. Anjanette Delgado and Kirkland Crawford are the executive producers of this podcast. Robin Chan and Kerry Jr. II provide technical support. Peter Bhatia is the editor of the Detroit Free Press. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Road to the Victors on Apple, Spotify, or your preferred streaming app of choice. And find us at freep.com/podcasts. Please subscribe, leave a rating, and tell your friends about us. It really does help. For more information on the 1997 Michigan Wolverines, pre-order the book, Hail Yes, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines at freep.com. I'm Andrew Hammond, and we'll see you next week.